Our next presenter is Grant Breitkreutz. He's from Redwood Falls, Minnesota. It's about 100 miles west of here. His farm is Stoney Farms. They're a regenerative farm. He's got a cow-calf operation, which they do managed intensive grazing on. They also have crops and work with cover crops, and more recently started direct marketing beef and pork. So, Grant?
All right, thanks for having me. I'm just going to apologize right away. Me and the guys have been cleaning corn bins, and it seems to have a little dust stuck today. So, and I wish it was only 100 miles. It was 5 hours. So we are about 5 hours straight west of here, Redwood Falls, Minnesota. Dawn, my wife, is back here. She and I own and operate Stoney Creek Farm along with our son-in-law and our daughter. Brad gave me a lot of ideas on what to talk to you guys about, and I guess the simplest thing is I'm just going to explain our journey. And Dawn titles this, she asks why. And just to give you guys a little preface on this, we've probably been doing what you call regenerative practices going on 18 to 20 years already. Dawn and I have been managing and operating our farm for 26 years, I believe. But Dawn came from the city. She didn't know how to run a riding lawnmower when I met her. My dad had made a promise to my mom. He was forced into farming to raise the rest of his younger siblings. And he made a promise to my mom when they got married that at age 50, they're going to sit back and reassess their life, how they're doing. And all of us boys knew that they had that promise, but when they turned 50, they sat back and assessed their life, and my dad quit farming instantly. Bought a truck, went coast to coast, hated farming. So it gave us a great opportunity. In a way, it's a great opportunity that we didn't have generational push behind us. You know, Dad wasn't there telling us what to do. And that's one of the things that is a big challenge as you move on down these different practices is most farms are generational. 1, 2, or 2, 3, sometimes even 4. So that's one of the peer pressures in making these changes. Brad had said oh, that's right, I gotta start with this. Years ago, I've spent 13 years on the Minnesota State Cattlemen's Board, and as I moved up to presidency, one of my best friends on there said, well, when you become president, you're not gonna tell us how to farm, and I'm not here to tell you guys how to farm. I'm gonna share our story about what we've done, our good, our bad, and I guess the thing that I hope to leave you with is to make you all more profitable through what I show you today. It's interesting that I sat on that board all those years. When I started on there was nobody doing no-till, there was nobody doing cover crops, and there was nobody rotational grazing that was on the board with me at the time. Right now, I can proudly say that every single board member on the Minnesota State Cattlemen's is doing some kind of no-till, cover crop, and moving cattle. So maybe it made a difference sitting on that board for all those years. But we started out, and I've talked to a bunch of you in here, we started out set stock in that golf course type deal, that putting green type grazing. That's what we knew. That's what Dad had taught me. That's all we knew how to do. And we were just plagued. We only had 58 cow-calf pairs, 130 acres of pasture, and we'd only get 3.5 months of grazing. So I started studying grazing management. And you can call it whatever you want. There's been so many terms over the years. I guess the biggest thing is we just call it adaptive managed grazing. Every year is going to be different for us. So we need to adapt our management for our grazing system. This particular picture, those are adult cows walking in there. This was one of the first pastures we used a NRCS EQIP contract on to divvy it up into 9 pastures. We immediately saw doubling in production, so their programs work. But it was like, well, if we can double at once, maybe we could do it again. So that's why I started studying management of grasses and how grasses work and function. And we got it to this. This used to be fertilized every year, sprayed every year where we could. This is no longer sprayed, no longer fertilized, and that's what we can do through our grazing management. We move most of our cattle every day. I mean, if we got somewhere to go, we'll make them a bigger break. But this is what it looks like after we're done grazing. We're leaving just we're leaving more grass than we ever used to grow on these pastures now. These are native pastures. It's too rough to ever be farmed. But that is our fertility, our herbicide program right there. We're putting some of the grass down to the ground for the biology to get a hold of and convert it into our fertility program. We obviously got great cover on the soils there, so we can't get weeds to germinate. And it's really simplified our life. This is what's happened to that pasture. When we signed up for that NRCS contract, they pretty much said we had 3 species of grass out there. We didn't have any clovers. We didn't have anything because we'd been spraying. And now Brad asked me to cover the voodoo part of what I call regenerating the soils. Is the first time I'd ever heard about a latent seed bank. I thought, how is that possible? We have put so much chemical in this pasture. I mean, we were spraying twice a year. There cannot be any latent seed bank there. The last time somebody that knows a lot more about grasses than I was out there, there was over 40 different species, plant species in there, and some are saying it's up over 50 to 60 plant species now just because we changed the way we managed it. We did not seed anything back out here. We just changed our management, gave it plenty of rest and recovery, and it came back. So once I believed that there was a latent seed bank, we farm along the Minnesota River. North of those trees, that's about a 100-foot drop down to the river. So we're on some marginal soils for our area. We were collecting crop insurance on this field and row crop production, 5, 6, 7 out of 10 years. It's really light soil. So we just given up. Before we started to understand soil health and grazing management, we just seeded it to alfalfa. We thought if we get 2 cuttings a year, if it rained good, we'd get 3, and we'll just take what we get. And as I learned grazing management, I learned that you have to manage for what you want. So I noticed that there were some small grasses coming in that alfalfa. So I would watch those grasses and we would make sure the cows would never take over half of that grass off. This was a very slow process. I wouldn't recommend it, but I wanted to do it to prove it could be done. In 7 years, we changed it to that without ever seeding another seed out there. You can see we got a tremendous amount of brome right here in this picture, but there are a lot of native grasses coming back. In fact, a bunch of warm season grasses coming back now that are hard to capture in a picture. And we have seeded nothing. We have done it all through grazing management. This is now one of our most productive pieces when you look at it as far as beef pounds produced per acre or grazing days. Like I said before, we now leave more grass than we ever used to grow through the season. I mean, I don't ever remember turning cows into grass that was boot high, and now we leave it boot high or higher. Kind of our goal is to take half, leave half. There's certain areas where we'll take less, certain areas we'll do more, but we never go through our system the same direction, the same time. Everything needs to change. Mother Nature, the soil, biology, everything likes disturbance. So this is our disturbance. Disturb it at a different time of the year, however you can do that. This is another thing that I couldn't believe happened, is that we got these native plants returning. We're surrounded by 1,200 acres of DNR land. They spend a tremendous amount of money trying to get prairie coneflowers and many other things that they call native back out there, and we're doing it, and we're still grazing cattle on it, which is a whole discussion for another day. But we've grazed a lot of DNR land in the past, and hopefully those guys change their idea about what it takes to manage state lands. But we manage the cattle all year round. We no longer bring our cows to the lot. It's been a couple of years now. It used to be we'd bring them to the lot in the mud season. You know how we get that across Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. We don't even bring them in now in the mud season. We will pick a pasture, a section of pasture land, and we will just call that our sacrifice paddock. So if we've got cover crops to graze, we're still managing the grazing in the winter. We can still get posts and poly in the ground because we usually have snow cover or a cover crop heavy enough to allow us to do that. And when you get a year like this, we had to go to TMRs. We didn't have enough cover crops. It was fun coming here because we actually got to see soil. We still have a foot minimum to 3 foot of snow cover where we're from. It's just incredible how it lessened coming this way. So, but these bunks, we built these bunks ourselves. You know, we made the commitment not to bring the cows to the yard. We move these bunks every 5 to 7 days to distribute that manure load. We figured it out. It was way cheaper for us to haul the feed out to where the cows are than it was to put up the bedding, shred the bedding in the yard, then haul the bedding and the manure back out to the field. We'll just spend the time and the money moving the feed out to the cows when we have to do this. And just a word of note, start at the far end of the field. Those cow pies will break load cells on feed wagons and everything else. You know, try to get the manures far away first and come back this way. But it's so important to us that this year we actually had to run the snow blower for 6 weeks to blow snow just so we could move bunks. You couldn't physically get through the snow. It was 42, 48 inches deep, but we still did it. So as I was learning grazing management, and obviously we were going after production, trying to get more days for the cows to graze, we inadvertently learned that we were dealing with soil health. We're actually dealing with water infiltration. We're dealing with aggregation in the soil. So many of these things that NRCS and others, conservation districts talk about, try to teach us as producers, and we noticed that our swamps and bogs and our native pastures were drying up. And it was because we had created the environment, the soil health, so we could infiltrate the water up on top of the hills. And I thought, well, now what's going to happen to all that wildlife down in the swamps and bogs? Well, now we've got springs that are developing on my farm. My dad's been there his entire life. When these springs develop, he gets mad because he usually loses his Kubota in one of them. But, you know, like he said, he's 75 years old. He said, I didn't know we could change the water infiltration pattern on the farm the way we've done it. It's just incredible what's happened. So it was touched on by one of the producers up here. Dawn and I, we abide by the 6 soil health principles on our farm. After we learned about grazing management, then we found these principles. It's keep the soil covered all the time, if at all possible. Minimize disturbance. We have been 100% no-till for 11 years now. That's our minimizing the disturbance and keeping our soil covered. We do a lot of other activities to cover this, and I'll try to show all that to you this afternoon. Increase the diversity. We used to be just corn, soybeans, and once in a while wheat. We now grow 9 to 11 different crops, depending on the markets and the marketing we can find in a given growing season. Keep living roots in the soil at all times. We cover crop every single acre so we can plant green the next spring, unless we're planting like an oats or a wheat crop where we don't want something to plant into green that early. And integrate livestock. It was easy for us because we had the cows, but there's lots of neighbors looking for ways to graze cover crops or something else. The biology that drops out of a cow's gut cannot be duplicated in a jug. It's just very important for us. We've got our operation set up. We manage about 1,900 acres. We've only got about 120 acres that we can't get a cow on right now, and that's going to get fenced if we get the chance to within the next year, so we can get cattle across every single acre that we row crop and pasture. And the biggest one was touched on before by that young man up here is context. If the government told us all we had to farm a certain way, none of our farms would look the same. Because we're human beings, we all got to do it in our own context. As you adapt soil health principles, cover crops, no-tilling, that type of stuff, we all got to do it at our own comfort level, our own pain threshold, and certainly our financial context. Because if we go broke fixing soil health, what good is that? We're not farming anymore. So we need to stay profitable. So just remember context, context, context. It was interesting. We're sitting back there visiting at the table talking about soil erosion. This is southwest Minnesota any given time except for this year where we got snowed in. I'm so glad we got snowed in this year because I can't imagine the amount of soil erosion we would have had. And I will show you another picture here quick. But this has gotten to be the norm in our area in the last 10 years. We are 14 miles south of the largest sugar beet co-op in the nation. Those guys believe they have got to have the soil absolutely black to get a sugar beet crop started, which is planted very shallow. So Gabe Brown, when he comes down to our place, he's like, you guys are just the most intense tillage place I've ever seen in North America. And Dawn wanted to put this in there. She's, what do you call yourself, a wordy, something like that? Annihilation, when she sees what our neighbors do, to reduce to utter ruin or non-existence, to destroy utterly. And Ray Archuleta is a good friend of ours. I mean, he says the soil's naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. As we learned grazing management and we started doing this soil health practices on our tillable land, we're actually working with a living, breathing biology, the soil. It's actually alive, and we got to quit trying to annihilate it and put it into this type of state. I did notice, and I will compliment you here, I noticed a lot more no-till once I crossed the border. Dwayne Beck, we've got to work with Dwayne Beck a lot over the years, and all tillage tools, they destroy the soil structure, reduce water infiltration. To that point, reducing water infiltration, obviously now we're dealing with a lot of these high-speed vertical tillage passes, and he's done the research that running one of those vertical tillage machines at 1 inch will reduce water infiltration by half. Just one pass of a vertical till tool running that shallow will reduce water infiltration that much. Obviously reduces organic matter because we're given a carbon burst, and increased weed populations because we're disturbing the cover on the land. We've been very blessed to work with Dr. Alan Williams over the years, and we had a big field day at our farm, and I told Alan, I said, you gotta come with me, I gotta show you what's going on here. This is the prairies of southwest Minnesota. We are putting a tile line in every 25 feet right now. All of our neighbors, they're basically buying the land over, sticking it all into water drainage. And Alan says it's just placing a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. If we would adapt the soil health principles so we get aggregation and get the water to go in the soil where we need it, we wouldn't have to do all this. Do we have tile on our farm? Absolutely. There's places we have to run tile. Have we put any tile in since 1998? No. I had to take a picture of my neighbor. He's easy to pick on. He's my neighbor. And I got to go on this road to get parts every day because we run older equipment. But the guy on the right moldboard plows and chisel plows every other year. The guy on the left works for the John Deere dealership. He's got access to any equipment he wanted. He thought he'd try no-tilling for once. The guy on the right got about 60% of his beans combined. The guy on the left got 100% of his beans combined after 2.8 inches more rain. That's just 1 year of no-till, how we start building soil structure back, how we make trafficability work for us. Just a lot of benefits to running 100% no-till if we can do it. So obviously 18, 19 were extremely wet years in our area. And it's been brought up already about the Iowa, the water quality issues that started coming up years ago. And all that pattern tiling, like I say, we farm a tremendous amount along the Minnesota River, so it all comes through us, And we wonder why our city cousins are trying to regulate us. Well, when we're doing this type of erosion, this is a creek that I was so proud of. We groomed it back into shape with the cattle. We had 100% forage cover all the way across that creek, and then 10.3 inches of rain one night, and that's what we got left with. And that all ended up right down here in Lake Pepin, because I'm on the Minnesota watershed. So there's lots of things as we're doing soil health. There's other benefits to to those of us other than the farmers that are doing it. I talked about wind erosion. This is just incredible by us. You know, like I said, I'm so glad we were covered up this year because that top right picture, that's a county road. That entire road ditch was filled full. They had to haul that soil out of there. But the one thing I wanted to know, because everybody told me that topsoil, that top part that blows off is the richest, and it is, because I went and soil tested it. In that particular chunk of ground, there was $30,000 an acre, plow acre foot of nutrients that left that farm field. You know, and this is an expense to all of us as taxpayers. And this really brought to light to me and Dawn how we're looked upon in production agriculture. There's a little tiny community right on the downwind side of this field. I asked that gal, I said, can I come and take soil samples out of your backyard? I want to test the soil and see what it is. And she said, well, yeah, I'll call my husband so he doesn't shoot you. And that was the end of the conversation. And then all of a sudden I started getting text messages from her. And she works at our local FSA office. And the text messages just kept getting worse and worse and nastier and nastier. And not at me, but she was sending me pictures of the inside of her house, which is a new house. Sending me pictures of her windows. So we waited for her to get home from work that day. And she looked at us and she said, you farmers do not care about us anymore, do you? And I thought, wow, that was a statement. I thought, that's not the image I want to portray. So the thing is we followed this field. It's just a mile from our place. There was absolutely no soil health principles applied to that field to cause that erosion in the first place. And this is 320 acres of corn. They did not combine 40 acres of it. That soil was dead. It wasn't even a medium to hold up a plant anymore. It couldn't. The cornfield over here to the left was not treated the same way. So it goes back to the soil structure. Soil health is so important for the crops that we're trying to raise. And obviously another point to this picture is crop insurance. You know, we all carry crop insurance yet, but the American taxpayer is subsidizing on us. And this was a hell of a claim, 320 acres of corn not harvested. So as you're looking at the actual biology in the soil, and once you start studying soil health and realize that we as farmers are managing an ecosystem, I want to get this point across, is that fixing soil biology for profitability should be our number one resource concern. There are many other concerns that we need to address, whether it's erosion, compaction, all that, but we need to do it for profitability. As I said before, if we're not in business, what are we doing this for? You know, let's just keep doing what we're doing until we're done. So we have got to watch profitability the whole time. And in saying that, that is what changed our operation. When Dawn and I started out, we were all about pounds of beef per acre, bushels per acre, just production. And when we sat back and started looking at profit per acre, that's what flipped our operation over. Do we have to produce 220 bushel corn like our neighbors? No. We still have to produce respectable yields, but we can produce them for way less cost and still maintain more profit per acre. Cover crops have been talked about just a little bit here. We were doing cover cropping before it was ever called cover cropping. We were trying to, basically it was a goal of ours to produce 3 crops in 2 years. And it was like Dan had mentioned earlier, we were cutting corn silage, putting in winter trip, cutting that for silage, and then growing soybeans. It was about trying to feed the cattle, but we noticed that the soils were changing. So we started putting in test plots on our farm of different cover crops to see what they're doing. Every one of the species of cover crops that are available to us will serve a purpose as far as your resource concerns. You know, if you're trying to break compaction, increase water infiltration, we need to do it all. Grant's not a very smart man. He puts in this beautiful test plot. I know it was the 4th of July because one of the neighbor kids was there helping us. They're like, why aren't you at the lake? We put in this test plot. I put it in right alongside the county road, completely forgot that 10 years previous to this, the county had rebuilt this county road. And you know what it's like when they do road reconstruction. They don't give you half of your topsoil back. In fact, it's just a mess. They put a little black stuff over the top. So in 10 years, we never grew a crop on this because we had the cows. All we did was we cover cropped it. And to our amazement, I'm going to have a big field day at the farm. I go get the backhoe, dig a soil pit, and it's like, Grant, as I'm digging it, I'm like, this is where they did the road construction. There's going to be nothing to see here. But if you look here, we've got 17 inches of coal block topsoil. Now I can pick on NRCS because they used to have a poster when you walked right in the door. It says it takes, what, 500 years to build an inch of topsoil? If I remember what that poster said, or 100 years? Well, did we build 17 inches of topsoil in 10 years? I think we did. It's amazing to me. We're on a lot of rolly hills, not quite as steep as you got here, but we were down to farming yellow clay. All of our black topsoil is gone. I can go out and put a spade in any one of my hills right now, and we're 6, 8, 10 inches of black topsoil on top of our fields again. This brings up an interesting conversation when you have university people out there, soil scientists out there, and they told me, well, that's not topsoil, Grant. And I was like, okay. They proceeded to give me a 15-minute explanation of what topsoil is. And when they were all done, I just looked at them. I said, I don't care what you call that. That's black gold. That's what holds our moisture. That's what holds all of our nutrients. You can call it whatever you want. I'm calling it topsoil. So keeping a living root in the system at all times. It was brought up about interseeding before. This is something we try to do every year. The bottom right picture, that's too late to do it. That's V6, V7 corn. It's way too late. We get in way early. We're running V2, V3 now. But we figured out how to do it. We just grabbed a couple drills and redid them. It's one way we can keep a living root in the soil all the time. This is kind of what it looks like. But if Dawn was up here with me, she'd point out that this is actually a really bad picture. Because I know in the back it's hard to see, but look at how much bare soil we have. We're not maintaining the cover that we talked about. That's one of the principles we need to have, is cover on the soil. What has happened in our system all these years of doing this is we have to go to higher carbon cover crops because the biology in our soil is digesting our cover crops so fast that we have a tough time keeping covers on our soil year round. I didn't think it was going to happen as fast as it did, but it's a really good problem to have right now. It means our soils are functioning. One thing we did when we did this early on with the drills is we'd plug the holes we weren't using. That was dumb. Why not let the seed fall out of there? We're disturbing the soil. So now we got cover crop growing right beside the corn. So I like putting in cover crop plots. This is our bale yard where we store bales to feed in the winter. Obviously, high compaction, high traffic and mud, everything. We get it leveled up. And we cleaned out the shed one day, and to the right-hand side of this picture, we started out with basically single species way over here on the right side. And I think about here in the middle, it looks like there's some oats. There's probably oats, turnip, and radish mix here, so it's a 2 or 3 deal. And then it was just a bunch here and buckwheat. But you can see as we increase the amount of species, we're getting a little bit better cover all the way along here. And then it was one of those days where there was an event coming to the farm and Dawn said the shed's getting cleaned out. So the grinder mixer got pulled out and probably 40, 50 different species of cover crops all got thrown in the grinder mixer. That's what's out here. Look, we got an absolute perfect stand every place we got compaction. That's why you don't have to go, like was mentioned earlier, you don't have to go to these 15, 30, 40 species. But what we've learned in our farming operation is the more species we can incorporate, the better success rate we have. It was mentioned earlier about that clover not getting up out of the ground. I firmly believe these plants do help each other out of the ground. Yeah, if we've got clover in the ground that deep in sand, it's not going to make it out. So we do kind of pick a medium depth a shallower depth than we would, say, if you're putting peas in, but they really work together. The synergies of them work together to help them each get out of the ground. And I will agree with the previous comment that not all the species make it, but I would say that the farther and farther Dawn and I have got down this road, if we are ordering a mix that's got 15, 18, 20 species in it, we will see all those species now. 15 years ago when we were doing that, we did not see all those species make it out of the ground or survive. I firmly believe that we've increased the soil health so most all of those species can survive and thrive and get out of the ground for us. This was one of my early lessons, was when planting cover crops, if you're taking a cash crop off, get it done right away. You know, one of the guys said he's all by himself. Well, that's a tough deal to try to get cover crops seeded while you're combining. I've got a dad that loves running a drill now. You know, we've found a way to try to get our cover crops in as soon as we're done harvesting. So this was both of these strips are 2 bushels an acre cereal rye. This was seeded September 20th after a late corn silage harvest in one of those wet years. Chain came off a drill, didn't notice it. Didn't want to go back and dig through seed trenches. We'll fix it when it's done. We're getting ready to put the drill away December 15th. And yes, we did seed cover crops that late. We were seeding cereal rye, so I went out and spiked those strips in. This is the next spring. Just look at the difference. I mean, that's obviously a huge difference, but we don't get many growing days up here in the northern part. So the sooner we can get these covers in, the better the response is. The other part is I told you we plant green, and you can see we've got some bare soil in here. You know, here we're going to have good cover crop growth to get something to cover the soil again. And as we've learned this kind of just floored me as people kept showing me this, but we've proved it true. Soils are just like us as human beings. They function best at 70 degrees. If it gets hotter than that, productivity, everything starts going down. At 100 degrees, only 15% of the moisture we've got in the soil is being used for growth. The rest is being lost to evaporation and transpiration. The biggest one for me, though, was this 140 degrees down here. Soil microbes die. We're doing all these practices and principles. We're planting cover crops, we're no-tilling, we're strip-tilling, whatever we're doing, trying to build biology in the soil to fix soil health. And then we do something that pops it to 140 degrees. It was mentioned earlier by Dan that cut high. That was the hardest thing for me to ever do, is cut a hayfield and leave all that extra hay out there. But when we were cutting hayfields short, we were jumping those temperatures right to 140 degrees in one afternoon, and a good 9,500 degree summer day with full sun. It'll pop those soil temperatures right up there, which is just incredible. I didn't think they would jump that high, but we've seen them as high as 155 degrees. So you just killed all the stuff you spent years building. There's a lot of stuff on here, but and it was brought up with Casey. How do you test for this? How do you watch this? Dawn and I were so early into this. There wasn't a Haney test. There wasn't a PFLA or PLFA, those tests. All we monitored was the earthworms. I mean, it's big. We can see it with the human eye. We just watched earthworm populations and figured out what was causing them to go up and what was causing them to go down. One of the things we did learn as we were going through this about the earthworms is that they are a big part of our fertility program now. And in saying that, when Dawn and I took over the farm, we were 5.8 to 6.1 pH on our soils. We limed for a few years. We got those 5.8s to 6. You know, we didn't move them very far. It was a big expense, took a lot of time because we didn't have custom applicators at the time, so we were doing it all ourselves. We quit liming 20 plus years ago. Right now, I can show you all my soil samples on these fields on our home farm where we've been doing these principles the longest. They're all at 6.8 or 7.0. How did that happen? We haven't put any lime on. Earthworm is a tremendous mover of the purest, cleanest fertility there is in the soil, and I credit them for changing our pHs that far, along with a lot of good, successful cover crops. Those roots go down deep. It's just a combination of everything working together to promote soil health. I don't think Daniel's not here anymore, is he? I wanted him to see this. This is what I wanted him to work on. 60-inch corn for silage chopping. We have done 5 years of research on 60-inch corn on our farm. Do not do this across the whole farm like I did 3 years ago and pick the wrong hybrids, but I think there's a lot of potential in 60-inch corn. We can still maintain production. We can do all the principles I talked about earlier about improving soil health, creating the biology we need in the soil health, and still producing a tremendous crop. Our custom operator came in, and we had had 5 inches of rain the night before he came to chop silage. He's over here in 30s for about 20 acres of corn. He's doing 30s, and he could see the 60-inch corn coming. He kept asking me, am I going to chop that? I was like, yep, you're going to chop it. And I could just see him itching to shove that hydro ahead. He could not get his scale working, and I wish to God he would have got it working. But when he got into the 60-inch corn, he was over here on this side chopping out of land, and he could see this coming. Anyhow, in the 60-inch corn, he was running about 4 to 6/10 of a mile an hour slower than he was in the 30-inch corn, which just floored us. But this is a full season cover crop put in there. 2 to 3 pounds of sorghum sudan, brown midrib, like Daniel was talking about. There's a lot of millet down underneath there. There's some vetch in there. There's just a good, diverse mix. I think there's a lot of potential to increase the feed value of the corn silage we're producing along without giving up any tons. This is the cover crops after chopping, and I believe this picture's in 30-inch corn, but that's 5 inches of rain. You can just barely see the track there from the choppers going through. That is the other thing that has really improved for us is this guy's driving to my place with a chopper, and he's a good friend of ours. He's like, Grant, it's never going to chop today. I said, don't worry about it, Mark. It'll be just fine. He got there late in the afternoon because we had to wait for the pile site to dry up some. He chopped there till 7 o'clock that night. He says, we're going up to shop. We're going to have a beer. He says, what the hell is this soil health and soil structure about? He said, I'm not going to be able to chop at my place for 3 to 4 more days. And they never left the track, and they chopped the trucks all day. This is just another picture of it. The trafficability for us is just incredible. This is a neighbor that we farm with. When we were chopping our own silage, there's another 6-inch rain. He calls me, he's like, Grant, let's chop silage this afternoon. I said, Ryan, it just quit raining this morning. Well, we've been doing these soil health practices. We got infiltration, we got soil structure, we got stability, we can go. Well, obviously, we didn't quite have infiltration yet, but we chopped for days over there at his place, and he went right back in there as soon as that water was gone, put cereal rye crop in there, tremendous cereal rye. We didn't even have to do tillage to knock any ruts out. Cover crops following wheat. This is the type of covers that we can produce now. And I know that the gentlemen up here on the panel were talking about this type of stuff. This really pushed us to adding more crops to our operation. And I was pushed by a neighbor that is constantly feeding cows. He's always out of grass. He said, Grant, he said, I can't afford to raise wheat crop. I said, Doug, I said, you can't afford not to. So he made me put pencil to paper with it. And these numbers up here, I gave up because our input prices are changing so much. So these are probably numbers from 2020. But with our cow herd, we can pull a bunch of grazing days out of here after a small grain crop or after a canning crop. We can pull a lot of grazing days out, and this was calculated at $200 a ton hay. We're still managing those cows as we're grazing, but we're getting a lot of dollars worth of grazing days there. But the whole problem with us in agriculture is our bankers make us answer to them from January 1 to January 1. And what Dawn and I learned over the years is that soil health and rebuilding the soil is not from January 1 to January 1. It's a long-term event. What we did in 2018 is probably still affecting us going into the 2023 crop year. Even shorter than that, what we did 2 years ago is going to affect us going into this year. We need to look long-term at what we're doing to build soil health, to reduce fertilizers, to reduce herbicides, to reduce purchased seed traits. We have broken the pest cycle on our farm by growing more than just corn and soy, that we don't need any of the traded seeds out there. We don't need them for rootworm. We don't need them for corn borer. The other part of it is it's helped us to tremendously reduce our herbicide. If we have a successful cover crop before a soybean crop, which was talked about earlier, we're a one-pass operation and we're done and we've got clean soybeans and we grow all non-GMO food-grade soybeans. So they got to be clean. But a successful cover crop allows us to skip that herbicide pass. Like I say, these numbers are a little old because everything's jumping and bouncing around so bad these last couple of years, but we can show over a period of more than 1 year, $352 an acre more net profit out of that by running the cows across there and reducing purchased synthetic or outside inputs following a small grain crop going to corn. Planting green. Years ago, it was talked about, and when Grant hears that, it can't be done. That's a challenge, so Grant goes out and does it. In this picture, I'm actually planting corn. That is not the way you want to be planting corn. But this was an extremely wet year. This is when we still shared a planter with a neighbor. We got the planter last that year. We're planting corn into rye that's starting to head out. The big thing about this picture is that you got to understand there's more than just rye there. There's hairy vetch underneath there. There's clovers underneath there. So we are sequestering and holding some nitrogen that's going to be available a little bit quicker than that rye. But what we learned from this, and we had learned before this, is that we got to front load our nitrogen on our corn. We no longer, we used to 3 passes and we'd start after the corn was up. Now we front load a bunch of nitrogen when we're planting corn. Because instead of Y dropping now, this rye will be releasing that nitrogen at Y drop time, so we don't have to do that anymore. Dawn put that note on there. Auto steer became necessary. I don't like technology. I struggle with my phone, but I wasn't going to go to auto steer because we run older equipment. And you planting a cover crop like that, 30-mile-an-hour winds all day, you are just sick, nauseous sick at the end of the day. And it's hard on planter markers because you get them set like a one-bottom plow so you can see them. But there's a lot of numbers up here and they're hard to see. But for corn, like I said before, it's about profit per acre. What we've learned as we've focused and worked on building soil health, that we're managing an ecosystem and fixing it, is that our profitability has increased. This particular year, I pulled numbers from my neighbor, and like I say, this was before everything went through the roof. And this guy wouldn't share with us. But that particular year, our cost of production on a bushel of corn was $2.45. His was $1 higher at $3.45. We're still producing the same bushels per acre. And we're right across the fence from each other. You could look at ears of corn, they looked exactly the same. So I just plugged that in. We just plugged land rent in. So if I'm just selling corn into the commodity market, I'm doing it with way less input than my neighbor is in a full tillage, non-cover crop system. The other part that probably one of the most well-known farmers when it comes to no-till and cover crops, David Brandt finally pointed out to me, as he said, "Grant, are you testing your corn for proteins?" And I hadn't been. We'd just been going by what we'd always done, feeding cattle. Never tested them. We can consistently now on our farm produce 8 to 10% crude protein corn with our healthy soils. On the newer farms that we picked up, they're not that high. So we're gaining a bunch of almost intangible benefits there. Plus with interseeding, we've got much longer days grazing cows on corn stalks. So there's many benefits to it. This is us planting soybeans. This should have been rye that should have been shoulder high. But one of the neat things about diversifying our operation and growing many different things on it is we calve in May, and it was one of those springs where all the native grasses came back very, very slow. We were so cold, and the grasses just weren't coming, and we had exhausted all of our stockpiled pasture, and we were out of feed. And we're standing at the top of this hill trying to figure out what we're going to do with the cows that are right on the other side of the road, and we turned around, and it's like, there's 40 acres of rye. So we changed our plan. This field was probably going to corn. We changed our plan, and we actually grazed those cows across there twice while they're calving on rye. So it gave us a neat opportunity to not overgraze our native pastures and still use this and still produce a very good soybean crop. Once again, a bunch of numbers. But we are, in this comparison, we're well over $2 a bushel cheaper on our input costs to produce a bushel of beans. It was touched on just a little bit this morning. Like I said, we're 100% non-GMO soybeans, over 100% all non-GMO crops. When we keep the soil covered, we don't expose the plant to that much disease. When we have healthy roots, when we have all that biology going in the soil, feeding that crop what it needs, we have healthy crops. We have been able to grow non-GMO soybeans for quite a while. We usually have very clean fields. Like I say, usually one pass of herbicide. But then we started looking for markets. And they're hard to find, but they're out there. 2 years ago, all of our beans went into non-GMO food grade production. We proved ourselves that we could provide a good clean soybean this way. And this year, the company came back to us, and we were offered, and we'll sign the contract when we get home, $3.50 over Chicago. We're usually a 60 to 90 cent negative basis. So we're getting $4+ a bushel over market for our soybeans. So there are markets and things available. They're hard to find, but they're out there. If we do not have a live living cover crop growing within our crop, immediately after harvest, like I said before, this is our tillage pass. The drill is out there seeding rye. It's very, very important to us to get that done. We were blessed to do a study on the farm to see how fast we could improve water infiltration, improve nutrient availability. What else was there, Dawn? Profit per acre, without growing a cash crop, without growing corn and soy. In this study, we grew oats and peas. We planted them in the spring. We took them off as a forage crop for winter stored feed. And then we came in with a 15-17 way blend of cover crops. What we learned from this study is that in 2 years, with running the cattle across there, we could take water infiltration rates from less than an inch per hour to 8 to as high as 30 inches per hour. It was just incredible what we learned from this study. So just remember, if we get into one of them prevent plant deals again, that we should focus on fixing the soil health that year, especially if we got a year that year. If we have a year where we can do something that's a fuller season with lots of diversity in it. And if you got a set of cows or stockers or whatever, you could take this off grazing it or forage. Diversity is a tough thing. The question was asked before about seed separating out. We don't feel we have a problem with seed separating out on just one drill fill, but we will not take a seed tender down the road for a long ways. We'll get some separation there. We'll actually move it from one tender to another to mix it back up. But it is a concern. The biggest thing is you got to calibrate equipment. If you're still using a drill, there's drill calibration apps out there from Oklahoma State University is the one Dawn uses a lot for our operation. It gets you very, very close so you're not having added expense on a very expensive cover crop trial. The biggest thing we learned is that if we can get a cow across every acre, it is a ticket for us. We move, like I said before, we move cattle just about every day. This is a picture of Dawn down. She runs yearlings on some flat prairie land down there. comes to me with a scrap of paper, says, I need this built. Actually, this picture here. So I'll go to the welder and we build it. But what it is if we're going to move cattle a bunch, if we're going to move them every day or every third day, it needs to be easy. It needs to be fun, or you're not going to do it. Why should farming be dreadful? It needs to be quick and easy, and doing it so we can fix soil health, so we can fix our profit per acre. So this little setup here, she carried about 6 miles of fence and all the posts to do it. As we're studying grazing and watching things that are happening, we realized that water is the biggest impact on the land from the livestock, especially hot days. They'll congregate around there. We've got no trees out there in that prairie. So Dawn wanted portable water, so we built that. So now when she moves yearlings, she just hooks on with her Kubota, drags her mineral. There's probably a lick tub behind here if the producer wanted it. Moves the water, drops the mineral in a weed patch. Just quick and easy things. Unspooling off the reel, quick and easy. Something to get you through it fast. One of the first people that we went to that gave us instruction on grazing management was a man by the name of Ian Mitchell Innes from South Africa. And Ian had a unique way of teaching. He did not like to be questioned. And I know it was mentioned before, Greg Judy, he and Greg are really good friends. And Ian didn't like being questioned, but he always told us, he said, if you build it, they will come and then charge the hell out of them for it. And I never understood that last part of it. And what Ian was saying is that if we start managing our farms and ranches as an ecosystem, all this stuff will come back. The wildlife will come back. And for his operation in South Africa, hunting is one of his larger income sources, and it's becoming one of ours. It's also becoming a problem because our neighbors aren't changing as fast as we are. The whitetails are just cleaning our clock year after year after year, but it does give us opportunity. And this is something that is coming. I mean, it's in the news. I was glancing at my legislative update from Minnesota right now. Don't forget about the insects. Been blessed to work with Jonathan Lundgren. No bees, no plants, no people. In my legislative update today from Minnesota, it looks like it's going to pass our legislature that we are going to have to prove a need for neonics if you want seed treatment. It looks like it's going through our legislature. I can't believe it's moving that fast. So the pressure is coming. So like I say, it took us a long time to get to planting corn with no treatment on it. We never did plant soybeans with no treatment on them. But we are very comfortable doing it now, and we've done it for several years. It can be done. It takes time to fix the soil health, the biology, but it can be done. So if we do get regulated into it, don't give up hope. We'll get through it somehow. Dawn put this together years ago. Had a really good friend who was an agronomist for a very large co-op. And the question's always asked, why aren't more people doing this? Why aren't more people doing this? So he surveyed a bunch of his farmers and put this together. Cover crops take nutrients and water from the cash crop. Cover crops have to be managed just like tillage. I mean, if we're coming into a dry spring and you got cereal rye growing, it's pulling a half an inch to an inch of water out of that soil profile every day, and there's no rain in the forecast, kill that cover crop. Don't put yourself in a bad situation. But we've seen with interseeding and those types of things, they're not pulling nutrients away from our cash crops. In fact, it's a synergy that seems to be helping our cash crops. Our soils don't warm up quickly enough for planting. This one went on forever at our place, and Dawn finally took it in her own hands. And one spring, she went out every single day and monitored our growing cover crop. We said our neighbors tilled black soil, and there's others out there that have all the data to back us up on this. Our soils, 24 hours a day, were consistently warmer than a black soil. Yes, during the day when the sun was out, that black soil got hotter, but 24-hour actual temperature, our soils are warmer from the plants and roots working in the soil. It won't work on my soil, my farm. This has been proven to work worldwide on any types of soil. the growing season isn't long enough for cover crops, and we are in a tough spot up here. If we're just a corn soy operation with our short growing season, but like I say, I'm straight west, y'all. I'm sure our weather is very, very similar. I've got a neighbor that's doing this in just a corn soy rotation, and it has helped his profitability out unbelievable. And what his soil tests are showing us is incredible, how he's building organic matter back into his soils. Don't have the right equipment. We're farmers. We can figure it out. We'll build it if somebody won't build it for us. I don't have livestock, therefore this won't work for me. I've got neighbors, not very many of them, that are doing this without livestock. It takes them just a little bit longer to start reducing their inputs. Because like I said before, what falls out of the back of that cow and what sheds off of that cow as they're covering that land can't be duplicated in a jug. So for us, what Dawn and I have seen is if we can run the cows across there, it speeds us up about 2 years as far as getting the soil back to where we want it. And my landlord wants to see black dirt in the off season. That's your problem. You maybe need a different landlord, but we do have landlords where we come from that if you farm like us, you will not get your lease back. The other part of it is think outside the box. We started stacking enterprises when our daughter wanted to come back. There's a lot to learn there. Do your research on it, do it correctly, but they can be a tremendous profit center for the farm. You know, we added back laying hens, broilers, pasture-raised hogs. We haven't had hogs in our place since the 80s, but we can pull some pretty good profit out of those. One of the reasons I'm here is because I firmly believe this is about education. Dawn and I had to sit back about 10, 12 years ago and decide if we were going to keep trying to help producers or just put our nose to the grindstone on our own farm, and we feel it's very important to help anybody and everybody out we can. We were at a conference in Minnesota a couple weeks ago. An agronomist, a long-time agronomist, was there and said that he said there's speakers yesterday that said, can't believe how this regenerative group or this group that farms this way, how open they are to sharing information, sharing stories, failures, successes. Day 2, he came up to me and he says, you're right. He says, I've never been in a group like this before. And I firmly believe that as we get down this path, the good Lord is telling us that we need to do this to keep our farms and operations successful and profitable. And I commend you. I mean, I got to sit back there with one of the board members of this. This is one of the most progressive groups we've ever gotten to speak to as far as farmer to farmer working together and talking things out. It's neat what you guys are doing. If you're interested in going into a real deep dive, we will be hosting the 6th 3-day Soil Health Academy at our farm this summer, July 18th through 20th. If you're interested in that, you can talk to Dawn and she can get you some information on that. So with that, I would challenge you to dare to be different. Thank you.